Hi everybody, today we are going to paint some big birds. Alright, let's start with the first bird, the heron. I've already transferred all my sketches to the paper. I began by outlining the whole bird using a very soft shade of the main color I'll be working with. And since we'll be building up with layers, it's easy to lose track of your initial markings if you just use a pencil. By making the markings with paint, it's going to be easier for you to see them later. I start with flat blocks of color, and the texture you see is created entirely through brush strokes. As you build the layers, the texture will show naturally without much effort. This was originally meant to be a follow-up to our previous exercise where we added flowers and ornaments to the background of the animals. But in the end, I felt they looked better with a minimal background, so that's what I went with. That said, if you still want to incorporate the elements from our midweek session, feel free. I think it will still be worth it. This is just a personal choice for this particular exercise. I preferred to keep it simple, okay? Now, my original intention was always to keep the compositions as flat as possible, but I know I often end up adding highlights, shadows, and more depth anyway. It just happens naturally while I work, so it's something I try and then my instincts take over. So here it is, our first bird of the day. Next up is the peacock. This one was a challenge. I wasn't expecting it to take so long, especially since most of these paintings take only 20 to 35 minutes. That's one of the reasons I'm using acrylics. You can do this with watercolor or gouache using the same technique, even oils. The main difference lies in drying time and blending behavior. With oils, you wait much longer between layers. With acrylics, the drying time is quick, but that also means you have to work fast or you lose the ability to blend. For the peacock, I marked the whole bird using the main color first, then started building the details. Now, for the tail, you can't just paint it flat. You need to add some structure to give the impression of volume and texture. So I simplified the pattern a lot. I stuck to 3 or 4 main colors and repeated the pattern. When painting birds or portraits, the only area that really needs detail is the eye. It doesn't even have to be the whole face, just the eye. Once you establish a clear focal point, you can be easier on everything else. That's actually the goal of these exercises, to loosen up, to feel free not to commit to every detail. Once everything was in place, I used dark green quick strokes along the edges to define the texture. Then, once that was dried, I added highlights with a lighter green. These colors don't reflect the peacock's natural palette exactly, and that's intentional. I want all the paintings in the series to feel unified. So you will notice that the colors appearing in all 6 compositions will be the same or very close. Now the flamingo. The same method again. I outlined the bird with the base color and painted everything flat. Any texture you see is purely from the brush on the paper. I'm using a very light cream color that's almost the same as the paper. And while the first layer is still wet, I start blending in off-white. That creates the illusion of feathers without any extra work. When working on detail, I follow a consistent order. Eyes first, then the head, then the body, and then everything else. Again, the eye is where I focus most. The rest can be soft and loose. Even though the flamingo is supposed to be pink, I added a thin wash of very diluted red on top to give it a slight accent. Otherwise, it would be too pink and it wouldn't harmonize with the rest of the series. As for the background, I kept it minimal again, just watery brush strokes to suggest a setting without distracting from the bird. Now, let's talk about the crane. Unfortunately, I thought I was recording, but the camera was paused. And by the time I noticed, I was already half done, so my apologies for that. But the process was the same. Flat blocks of color first, followed by a second layer that adds volume and texture, and then a third layer for highlights and shadows. You can leave it flat if you want, but I'm showing you that with just a little effort, just brushwork, you can add depth and interest. Don't feel intimidated by the final result. This was done in just 25 minutes. Next up, the Pelican. The Pelican I chose is white and gray, two colors that are tricky to paint. In nature, they work because the bird is part of a rich environment. But in isolation, we need to add interest ourselves. You make gray by mixing black and white. However, try also adding some burnt amber and blue to warm it up a bit. That works both for light and dark grades and also for the whites. Now I'll add a few final details. I'll speed up things a little bit since my hand is blocking the camera. My apologies again. Some of the birds ended up slightly cropped in the video, but I hope it's still clear enough to follow. Right at the end, I use a diluted wash of burnt umber to create shadows, especially around the neck where it's all white. This wash is very translucent. It's not meant to cover up, just to tint slightly and add depth. It's a simple technique that adds visual interest with minimal effort. And finally, our black swan. I had been thinking about doing a white one for a while, but honestly, it's been done so many times, so I went for black. And I found this reference photo online, and I just loved it. Again, I painted the body flat, then added texture once the first layer dried, and there's absolutely nothing complicated here. The richness and depth come entirely from the brushwork. You don't need to paint a real bird. You need to paint your vision of the bird. If you want something photorealistic, take a photo. But that's not what anyone really wants. What people want is your vision of it, how you see the bird. And that's something only you can offer. So make it yours. The background again is very minimal. I'm not really painting it, just staining the area with a very light wash. It's subtle, but it gives the piece some atmosphere without competing with the main subject. Even though we changed the concept to this minimalist background, I think it works beautifully because it feels more elegant and balanced. However, if you'd like me to paint another version with more decorative backgrounds, just let me know. I'm always up for a challenge. So here they are, all the birds we painted today. I hope you learned something new today and that this will inspire you to paint your own birds. As always, keep on practicing and thank you for joining us.